Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We are just getting everybody in. Shabbat Shalom to Larry and to Tybal, and those are the only faces I can see so far. So Shabbat Shalom to Abe Berman, who I've already said Shabbat Shalom to, but good to see you. And the Backracks, I think, are here, and Marshall Kramer, and Irv. Shabbat Shalom to Irv. Okay, we are going to begin with Mincha. Hi, Marcy. Shabbat Shalom. We are going to begin with Ashrei on page 214 or page 226 or page 558. And for now, you may remain seated, and in just, well, I guess not just a moment, but soon thereafter, I'll ask if you're able to do so to please rise. But for now, we're starting with Ashrei again on page 214, page 226, or page 558. Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha, Odi Hallelu Chasela, Ashrei Am Shekachalo, Ashrei Ha'am Shadonai Elohav, Tehillah LeDavid. Tehillat Adonai Yedaber Pi, Vivarech Kol Basar Shem Kodesh Le'olam Va'ed, Va'anachnu Nevarechia, Me'ata Ve'ad Olam, Hallelujah, Uva L'Tzion, Goel Shel Beshua Yaakov Ne'um Adonai V'Nei Zapati Yatom. Va'ata Kadosh Yoshev Tehillat Yisrael V'kara Ze'el Ze Ve'amar, Kadosh 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 Adonai Tzavaot, Meloch La'aretz Kevodo, Mikol Min Den Min Den Ve'amin. V'tisa'eni ruach v'eshma charai korash gadol, Baruch kevad Adonai mimkomo. Netatani rucha v'shimati b'tarakos. Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed. Adonai Avraham, Yitzchak v'Yisrael v'tinu shema zat olam. Adonai tzvadam imanu, miskavlanu Elohei Yaakov Sela. Adonai tzvad asher adam boteach bach. Adonai Hoshia HaMelech, Ya'anenu ve'yom korenu. Baruch Eloheinu shebaranu lichbado, Dilanu minatoim l'dor tortot. V'yiftach libeinu b'torato, v'yasem elamina avato, v'yirhata v'lasar etzono le'odam v'lev shalom. Ve'yivtechu b'chayodei shemecha, ki lo azavta dorshecha Adonai. Adonai chafetz laman sidko, yagdil Torah ve'yadir. We're going to skip Chatzi Kaddish since we are still only davening Keyachid. We are not davening in a minyan. I will read for us the parsha of this coming week, Behar. If you are following along in an Eitz Chaim Chumash, we're on page 738. If you're following along in a Bible of any kind, it's Leviticus chapter 25, verse 1. The beginning of chapter 25. I'm just going to get a luach here so I know what verse is. Okay, Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Knishan B'Mitzotav Etzivanu La'asok B'divrei Torah. Vayedaber Adonai Moshe Behar Sinai Lemor Daber B'nei Yisrael V'marta Alehem Ki Tavou El Haaretz Asher Ani Noten Lachem V'shavta Haaretz Shabbat L'Adonai Sheshanim Tizra Sadecha V'sheshanim Tizmor Karmecha Ve'asafta et tevuata. I didn't say this before I started, and I meant to. This parsha, the beginning of this parsha, talks about the Shemitah year. So we're talking about when we have this time period, just like we have for Shiva, just like we have for Yahrzeit, just like we have really for most things in Judaism in terms of a timeline. like the Omer counting up to Shavuot, we have a sense where they come from or if they've been tended in a certain way. But the 7th year of a field or of a farm or anything that grows crops, we must let the land lay fallow. We can't actually pick crops. So there are ways around that when you live in Israel. The last time that there was a Shemitah year, I lived in Israel, and it's a very interesting experience because there are different places that have different signs as to what kind of gleaning happened for those crops to then make it to the shuk or the supermarket. The price also goes up a little bit for produce, but God willing, Josh Jacobs will be in Israel next year, and so another rabbinic intern of Temple Beth Am will get to experience a Shemitah year, and he'll have to come back and tell us all about it. So it begins this coming Rosh Hashanah in the land of Israel, and we're hearing about why right now in our Parsha. So again, chapter 25 of Leviticus, verse 4 through 7 is this next aliyah. Uvashana hashvit Shabbat Shabbaton yeh la'aretz Shabbat ladonai tzadcha lo tizra v'chamecha lo tizmor et seficha Ketzircha lo tiksor ve'et invei nezirecha lo tivsor Shanat Shabbaton yeh la'aretz Ve'haita Shabbat ha'aretz lachem lecha lecha uleavdecha ve'la'amadcha ve'lischircha uletoshavecha hagarim imach ve'livhemtecha ve'lachaya asher be'artzecha tiechol tvuata lechol. And by the way, I'll just mention one more thing. What you're reading in the Parsha right now is exactly how it's still practiced. So sometimes our laws that come from Torah are changed so that they make sense for the world that we're living versus the world that was created around the Torah. But exactly what I just read in terms of how it shall rest and what you shall not pick and all the rest of it, that's exactly how it's practiced today. So the laws expound upon it, but this is exactly where it comes from, and none of what we've read thus far has changed in the laws of Shemitah. The next aliyah is a little bit longer, verses 8 through 13, chapter 25 of Leviticus. Vesfarta lecha sheva shabbatot shanim sheva pa'amim vehayu lecha yamei sheva shabbatot shanim tesha ve'arba'im shana ve'ha'avarta shofar tru'a bechodesh hashvi'i Besor lachodesh bayom ha'kippurim ta'aviru shofar bechol artzechem v'kidashtem et shnat ha'chamishim shana ukratem dror ba'aretz lechol yoshveha yovel hi tieh lachem v'shavtem ish el achuzato ve'ish el mishpachato tashuvu Yovel hi shana ha'chamishim shana tieh lachem lo tizra'u ve'lo tiksaru et sficheha ve'lo tivseru et nezireha ki yovel hi kodesh tieh lachem min hasadeh tochlu et tevu'ata bishnat hayovel hazot tashuvu Ish el achuzato. So now that we have finished the Torah reading for Mincha, but also for this upcoming week, is there anybody here who is in need of an El Male? Yeah, Larry.
Shabbat Shalom to everyone. This is in memory of my mother, Marilyn Rosenstein, on her 12th yortzeit.
Would you like me to do the El Male, or would you like to do it?
I would appreciate, Rabbi, if you would do so. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to. Can you tell me her Hebrew name, Larry?
Yes, it's Miriam Bat Benyamin V. Etta.
Okay. El male rachamim, shochen bamromim, hametzeh menucha nechona, tachat kanfei hashchina, b'ma'alot kedushim u'taharim, kezohar kiyamasirim, et nishmat Miriam.
Bat Benyamin.
Benjamin ve'eta שהלכה לעולמה בגן עדן תהא מנוחתה ענה בעל הרחמים הסתיריה בסתר כנפיך לעולמים וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתה אדוני הוא נחלתה ותנוח בשלום המשכבה ונאמר אמן. Yehi Zichra Baruch. And Larry, did you want to share a few memories of her with us?
Sure, thank you. Basically, there's not a day that I go by not thinking about her. She really was a very nurturing mother when I was a child and helped me build a lot of confidence because I was a shy, quiet person. And she always said, I believe in you. I believe in you. Believe in God. And I just feel very blessed to have had the time that I did with her.
Thank you, Larry. May her memory forever be a blessing, and may we have many more opportunities to hear stories about her and stories of how she impacted your life. Any other yard sites this evening? Okay. Oh, Tybal, yeah.
Oh, it's not a yard site. I just wanted to ask because it wasn't a full Torah service. So I'm assuming without the bracha for the Torah service, you don't do gomel?
We haven't done Gomel, but if you would like to recite Gomel, I'd be happy to hold that space for you if you would like. Would you like to share why? You don't have to.
The short version is after having been home only around my spouse and adult child since the 2nd of March 2020, I went out to get the first dose of Moderna and I had an adverse reaction that isn't even in the database.
Okay.
So even though it's not quite over, in theory, that was Thursday. Gomel's supposed to be within 3 days.
That's okay.
And it was, I didn't wind up in the hospital. So I don't know. For me, I just like the idea of Gomel, if that's okay.
Yes, of course it's okay. Let me just find the page so that people can respond to you. I just was not prepared with it, so give me 1 second. It's on page, I'm sorry that I don't know what page it is in the Siddur Sim Shalom, but it's on page 173 in the Lev Shalem, if people would like to respond to Tybal's saying the beginning of the blessing.
And the Sim Shalom, whatever edition I'm happen to be holding, it's 142.
Oh, great. Thank you.
So do you want me?
Yes, you say it and I'll respond to you.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hagomel lecha yavim tovos shegmalanu kol tov.
And we respond, Mi shegmalech, kol tov, huigmalech kol tov sela, which means may you go through moments like this with continued strength and allow you to have the second dose in a very healthy way. And I hope that that is behind you and that we can all learn from it, because that's one of the most important pieces of those kinds of experiences. We're going to continue now with the whispered Amidah, which can be found on page 223 or page 234 or page 574. Ose shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael ve'yimeru amen. Ose shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'akol Israel ve'yimeru amen. tzidkaka tzedek le'olam ve'tortcha emet v'zikav le'olam Adam v'ema toshia Adonai. If you're not already standing, please rise for Aleinu. It is on page 231 or 248 or 598. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol v'anachnu korim v'shtachavim u'madim l'fnei melech. Kakatu b'toratecha Adonai imlach le'lam va'ed v'ne'emar v'haya Adonai l'melech kol haaretz v'yom hahu yeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad. Mourner's Kaddish, page 232 or the next page in your Siddur. Yit gadal ve'yit kadash shemei rabbah be'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei b'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei dechol beit Israel ba'agala u'vizman kari v'imru amen. Yehei shemei rabba mevarach leolam lomei almaya. Yit barach ve'yish tabach ve'yit pa'ar ve'yit romam ve'yit naseh ve'yit hadar ve'yit aleh ve'yit halal shemei dekudesha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shalama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. And we'll turn it over now to our lovely intern, Josh Jacobs.
Thank you so much. Shabbat shalom, everybody. Wonderful to see you all. Before launching into the text study, I just wanted to acknowledge that I was debating whether or not to talk about the recent tragedy at Mount Meron, because I know it's still very raw and just not something that we want to think about or talk about if we don't have to. But in reading Parshat Behar Bechukotai with that lens, having just experienced it, I thought maybe it was still worthwhile talking about, because sometimes when something is so raw, it's actually important to create the space to process and discuss together. So with everybody's permission, I know it's just such a tragedy, and but I hope it's okay that we not only dedicate this learning to the victims and to their families, but that we also invite each other to process together. I just want to say from my perspective, it's really interesting, because for all the connection I feel to the ultra-Orthodox community, I also feel certain disconnect. And I can imagine that the people in this room feel similarly, that there's a lot that binds us and a lot that separates us in terms of how we understand and practice Judaism. And when I look at some of the pictures of this huge masses of people, right, in their black hats and in their suits, and almost becoming one body, right? Because I think that's by design, that in the ultra-Orthodox community, there is this emphasis on community versus individual, and that's consistent throughout Judaism, of course. But I think it's particularly there in the ultra-Orthodox community, just seeing this one mass. And for all the ways in which we might be different, obviously we're all one Jewish people and one Jewish community. And so the learning that the big insight that I wanted to leave us with is what I also want to start us with, which is that if any one of us falls, we all fall, because that's the nature of any community and any collective, any people. So if I have sharing capacities, which I think I do, I'm going to go ahead and share the source sheet. This is from Behar Bechukotai. And for those of us familiar with it, Behar, we get a lot of discussion about the Jubilee, which we read just now, and then Bechukotai gives us blessing and curse, right? If you follow the commandments, all of these blessings are in store for you. And if you swerve away from the commandments, here are the curses that are in store for you. And the curses are quite graphic. And even though that what I'm about to bring is in the context of a curse, for the sake of our learning and our discussion, I'm wanting to separate it from that context. I want us not to associate it with the curse in which God is explaining it in the Parsha. Because I think when you do that, the verse hits us in a different way. So the first verse, this is why I couldn't not bring it. It just, in reading it this week, I couldn't help but associate it with the tragedy. This is from Vayikra, verse 26-37. With no one pursuing, they shall stumble over one another as before the sword. And there's a very interesting commentary on it. So again, it's in this, because the context is curse in this original, in the Torah, this commentary by Rabbeinu Bachya is talking about stumbling as if in sin. So again, I want to remove that from what we're talking about here. Obviously, that has nothing to do with the tragedy that happened, and that's not how I'm understanding it here. But I do think it says something about collective responsibility, ownership, and connection for one another. So can somebody volunteer to read the Rabbeinu Bachya in English? Happy to call on the first hand, or if you unmute yourself, that works too.
I'll read.
Thank you. Thanks, Joanna.
V'chashlu ish be'achiv, they will stumble over one another, etc. They will stumble each over the sins committed by the other. God tells Joshua that Israel has sinned. God did not tell him that an Israelite had sinned. The whole nation was held responsible for the sin of an individual. Someone who does not admonish the sinner has made himself his partner. This incident prompted the sages to comment that the use of the word nut in El Ginat Ha'egos Yaraditi, I went down to the nut grove in Song of Songs 6:11, describes that just as it is impossible to pluck one walnut without making the whole tree shake, so it is impossible for an individual to commit a sin without ripples of what he did affecting the entire Jewish people.
Great, thank you for reading. So again, I want to remove it from the context of sin here, because I think it applies across the board, right? That image really struck with me. It's why I made it the title, that in plucking one nut from the tree, the whole tree shakes, the whole bundle falls, that there are ripple effects amongst in the community. One person does something and it's felt throughout. So does this resonate with anybody? Any initial reactions to this at all? Or if you want to respond to the question, how does this hold true in your experience, or how does it not? That whether we're talking about the Jewish community or your family or whatever your close circle is, or maybe your extended circle, when somebody achieves or fails or has a success or a failure or anything at all, how is that ripple felt throughout? Joanna, I see your hand up again, is that to contribute? That'd be great.
So I'm thinking right away, first of all, of Yom Kippur, but Tefillah in general, that, Yom Kippur, we confess our sins in the plural as a community and not in the singular as I.
Mm-hmm.
And most of our Tefillot are in the plural collective. We come and we stand as a community. And just in general, that notion of while you can fulfill your responsibility to pray as an individual by yourself, it's deemed better to do it in community. And there are certain things that can only be said in community.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Thank you. Right. Our very liturgy is in the plural because it's expected that we're praying together. And even when we're not, it's still in the plural because you're, I guess, in a way, you're hoping that you can pray together, and especially in COVID, when in the times when we're not able to pray together, we long to pray together because we are we're by nature, we're a community. Thank you. Wonderful. I see another hand. Yes, please.
And I'm sorry, I couldn't get there with mobility fast enough, but I was wondering whether the stumble word in the Hebrew was the same stumble word from the Holiness Code, the not place the stumbling block before the blind?
That's a great question, and I don't know it off the top of my head. I wonder if anybody else does. Yes, Marshall, I see your hand.
Well, in the Holiness Code, it's lo titein michshol lifnei iver, lo titein michshol. So you have the chav, shin, and the lamed there, and we here have the word v'chashlu. So it's the same shoresh.
Thank you. So, and I want to make sure I say your name correctly. Is it Taybel?
No, my religious name is Tybel, which is the
Tybel.
Yiddish.
Thank you, Tybel. So yeah, is there a connection there that you were hoping for?
Just the interweaving of communal and individual. I mean, I'm losing track, but wasn't that last week's Parsha? Didn't we just have Kedoshim? It was doubled,
We
but
did.
was that last week or 2 weeks ago? Last week?
Kedoshim, yeah.
I don't know, I'm not articulating it, but if one isn't careful about placing stumbling blocks before the blind, the rabbinic interpretation being metaphoric, that's what happens. Then the society stops working as it's supposed to.
Yeah, sure, no, absolutely, right. If our values aren't where they should be, all of society could stumble or crumble and collapse, right? If we're not careful not to put stumbling blocks before the blind, how easily there's a domino effect. And I know that all this is, again, it's so raw and just throwing around terms like this, but I think it's important for this discussion that how fragile the fabric of community is, that the tighter we are, also the more our fates are wrapped up and bound in one another, that if one falls, we all fall. And there are obvious pros and cons to that. Any other thoughts and reflections on this before we move on to the next?
I think in this COVID era, this is so true in terms of, especially in the beginning when we were all trying to wrap our heads around the fact that wearing a mask wasn't so much about protecting myself, but about protecting others that I might come into contact with. And, so the converse of that, of, the effect of quote unquote, the sin of not wearing a mask really did have implications upon others, and otherwise not following, practices for COVID-19, and the realization that, it meant putting aside a lot of other mitzvot, that value in our tradition that pikuach nefesh trumps all.
Absolutely, right. And so it goes beyond even just the tightly knitness of the Jewish community, but really the global community, that we all breathe the same air, that how quickly a pandemic can spread from one end of the world to the other, because even beyond our Jewish community as a human species, we're just all so interconnected and interwoven. Okay, I want to move on to the next text. Can somebody volunteer to read this? This is from Shavuot. This is Tractate Shavuot from the Talmud Bavli. And this you've probably heard before. If not, obviously no problem. But it's a pretty classic piece of text from our rabbinic literature. Anybody want to read in English? Yes, please. Sorry, I'm not seeing all of
That's okay.
Great.
And they shall stumble one upon another. They shall stumble spiritually, one due to the iniquity of another, which teaches that the entire Jewish people are considered guarantors for one another.
Great, thank you, Larry. So this is obviously a fundamental value, and I think it's something that I take great pride in reading. And I know it's also harder. It's easier said than done. So I'd love any reactions, responses to this. Is this something that is achievable? Is it something that's wonderful to strive for, but impossible to attain? What does it mean to truly be responsible one for another? Yes, please.
It's just not what you asked for, sorry, but just an association, which is there's a time period in my life where for other people, I was writing a lot of life cycle documents, including covenantal ceremonies for children of either gender. This was enough decades ago, only 2 genders were being considered. But there was a quotation that everybody loved, which is that the children were the guarantors. The next generation were I'm blocking on exactly what it was, but it's that the next generation were the guarantors of the Torah. Maybe it's not so popular anymore. And I just thought that was interesting because here it's just everybody guarantors for everybody else. And this was a generational thing.
Oh, that's really interesting. The Lador Vador concept there, that you hopefully instill the values in the next generation, that you can rest assured that they will be guarantors for the tradition, for the Torah, especially years later when we're no longer around and it's up to the next generation. Lovely. Anyone else? What does it mean to truly be responsible one for another? And you can also apply it to the specific situation that prompted all of this, that there are certain things where when we look at the ultra-Orthodox community, I think there's so many ways in which I aspire to that level of devotion and joy, and for all these that huge mass to congregate at Mount Meron for Lag BaOmer celebrations and festivities. It's a certain joy and ecstasy that I can only aspire to. And there are other ways in which I have chosen not to live an ultra-Orthodox life. And so there are these bridges and there are these walls that bind us and separate us. And yet, in moments where we might separate one from another, whether it's to Jews to the right of us, Jews to the left of us, wherever you find yourself, what are the ways in which, do you agree with this notion that we are guarantors one for another, no matter our disagreements or agreements, that we're actually responsible for one another? We can't just say, chalk it up to differences. We're actually responsible one for another. And you can also apply it to the American landscape or to any other group. It doesn't have to just be the Jewish community. Yes, Taibo, please.
Senior mind works slowly, especially sleep deprived. I actually think it's Shir HaShirim Rabbah, and that there was a series about who weren't good guarantors. There was just a series. Definitely ancestors, maybe kings, maybe prophets, I don't remember, but a series. And at the end, it's how about our children, and God accepts the children's as the guarantors of the Torah. But I think it's Shir HaShirim Rabbah.
Oh, great. Thank you for sharing. That's great. Allows us to go and reference that. Any final thoughts on this text before moving on to our final piece? Okay, great. So before we round this off, I just want to thank everyone again for jumping in with me on this vulnerable subject, and one that we're still processing and coming to terms with. So again, the reason I wanted to bring all this is just that idea that when one falls, we all fall. Even I was personally I had complicated feelings around this, because certainly nothing but heartbreak and tragedy, but also this feeling of I so connect to these people, and I also don't in significant ways. And I didn't want to feel any disconnect. I wanted to feel only connection, but that's not always easy to access, which is why I wanted to bring these sources, because I think through the Parsha, I felt that deeper connection. So can somebody please read this final poem? This is by Carly Wilson Baker. This was a poet in the sort of turn of the century, 20th century, and 21st century. And I think it's very lovely. Could somebody volunteer to read? Great. Yes, please.
Oh, is that me? Okay. Oh, thanks.
You're good.
Oh God, you said, say we, but I shook my head, hid my hands tight behind my back, and said stubbornly, I. Again, you said, say we, but I looked upon them, grimy and all awry. Myself in those twisted shapes? Ah, no. Distastefully, I turned my head away, persisting, they. Again, you said, say we. And I, at last, richer by a hoard of years, looked in their eyes and found the heavy word. Sorry. Oh, yeah, thank you. Where am I? Oh, where was I? Oh, looked in their eyes and found the heavy word that bent my neck and bowed my head. Like a shamed school child, that I mumbled low, we, oh God.
Thank you. With that, I want to transition us over to Mariv and Havdalah as we conclude our service together. Thanks again all for learning with me and for contributing. We will jump back into our Siddur with our Mariv service, which can be found on page, let me pull it up, 264 if you're in Lev Shalem, 281 in Sim Shalom, and 200 in Slim Shalom. Vehu rachum yechaber avon v'lo yashchit, v'hir bala shiva po v'lo ya'ir kol chamato, Adonai Yoshia hamelch yaneinu v'yom korenu. Baruch atah Adonai Elohim melech haolam. Uma'avir yom u'mevi laila, uma'avdil ben yom uvein laila, Adonai tzavot shemo, El chai v'kayam, tamid yimloch aleinu le'olam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai, ha'ma'ariv ha'ravim, Avad olam Yisrael. V'avtachata al tasir memenu le'olamim, Baruch atah Adonai, ohev amo Yisrael. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Adonai Elohechem Emed. We pick back up. We're on page 267, Lev Shalem, otherwise 283 or 204. Umalchut Ratzon Kiblu Alehem, Moshe Miriam, Ubnei Yisrael Lecha Anushira, Besimcha Rabba Vimru Chulam. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha neder b'kodesh, noratilot o seifele. Malchut chara uvanecha, bokeyam lifnei Moshe, ze eli anu ve'amruhu, Adonai yimloch le'olam ba'ed. V'ne'emar kivada Adonai et Yaakov, v'gelam yad chazak mimenu, baruch atah Adonai, Ga'al Yisrael. Hashkiveinu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ashalom. Ushmor tzeitenu uveinu l'chaim l'shalom eta ve'ad olam, baruch atah Adonai, shomer amo Yisrael la'ad. Baruch Adonai Olam, amen ve'amen. Ki amalchut shelcha hi, ulo me'ad limlach bechavod, ki ein lana melech ele ata, baruch ata Adonai, ha-melech b'chavodo tamid, yimloch aleinu l'olam ve'ed, ve'al kol ma'asav. We skip Chatzi Kaddish and we jump into the whispered Amidah, which can be found on page 270 on Lev Shalem, 286 in Sim Shalom, and 210 in Slim Shalom. I invite you to rise if you're able as we say our silent Amidah. Ose shalom bimromav uyase shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imeru amen. Ose shalom bimromav uyase shalom aleinu ve'al kol Israel ve'imeru amen. I invite you to continue at your own pace. Otherwise, we will skip Chatzi Kaddish and we will head to the Aleinu, which can be found on page 281 in Lev Shalem, 297 in Sim Shalom, and 696 in Slim Shalom. Aleinu Shabeach Ladon HaKol Hated Gedula Leotzer Breshit Shelo Asanu Kigoye Haratzot Velo Samanu Kimishpachot Hadama Shelo Sam Chelkenu Kahem Vegor Aleinu Kechol Hamonam Anachnu Korim Umishtachavim Umodim Lifnei Melech Malchei Hamlachim Hakadosh Baruch Hu Shehu Notei Shamayim Ve'Yoser Haaretz U'Moshe Vikaro B'Shamayim Imal U'Shchinatu Zo Begovei Meromim Hu Eloheinu Einod Hamemokenu Efezulato Kakatuv b'torato v'ratayom v'hashivota elevavecha ki Adonai hu Elohim b'shamayim imal ve'al haaretz mitachat einod. Kakadu b'toratecha, Adonai yimloch leolam va'ed. V'nemar v'haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz. Vayom hahu yeh Adonai echad. U'shemo echad. We turn now to Kaddish Yatom, Mourner's Kaddish, which is 282 or 298 or 698. Yit Gadal V'yit Kadash Shemei Rabbah Ve'alma Divra Kirute Ve'amlich Malchute B'chayechon U'v'yomechon U'v'chaye Dechol Beit Yisrael Ba'agala U'v'zman Kariv V'imru Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabba Mevorach Leolam Ulal Me Almaya. V'yit Barach V'yishtabach V'yit Pa'ar V'yit Romam V'yit Naseh. V'yit Adar V'yit Ale V'yit Halal Shemed Kudisha Berichu. Le'ela Min Kol Berachata V'shirata Tush Bechata V'nechamata Da Miran Be'alma V'imru Amen. Yehi Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya V'chaim Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen. Ose Shalom Bimromav Hu Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen. We'll continue on in just a moment to Havdalah, although even though I'm on the East Coast, I'm pretty certain that in Los Angeles, Shabbat is over at 8:17, which is still just a minute or two away.
We're good.
So feel free at this.
We're good.
What'd you say, Larry?
We're good.
You're good?
It's Shabbat's over.
Okay, good. In that case, we'll go straight on ahead to Havdalah. If you're in Lev Shalem,
Josh,
yeah.
can we count the Omer?
We can absolutely count the Omer.
I mean, I'm up on it if you need someone to count.
Great, yeah, go for it, please. That'd be great.
And I just comment that we actually read these words when I say Kemosh Katu B'Torah. We actually read these words this morning in Parshat Emor. At least in the triennial reading we did. Hinene muchanim zuman, hinene muchanim zuman, hinene muchanim zuman, lekayim mitzvat aseh, lekayim mitzvat aseh, kemo shekatu b'Torah, hinene muchanim zuman, kemo shekatu b'Torah, hinene muchanim zuman, וספרתם לכם מאחורת השבת, הנני מוכן ומזומן, מיום אביכם את עומר התנופה, הנני מוכן ומזומן, שבשבתות יממות ינה, על במאחורת השבת השביעית תספרו 50 יום, והקרבתם מנחה חדשה לאדוני, והיינו אמרנו אלוהינו, אלינו מעשה ידינו, כנראה אלינו מעשה ידינו כנראה. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר קידשנו מצוותיו וציוונו על ספירת העומר. היום 35 יום שהם 5 שבועות בעומר. Today is the 35th day, which is 5 weeks of the Omer.
Great. Thank you, Larry. We continue with Havdalah 283, 299, or 700. I'm going to go ahead and light my candle over here. On resources, so instead of a nice twisted one, I have two candles that I'll be lighting here. Ya na 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 ya na 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 ya na 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 ya na na da 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 ya na na da 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 ya da da ya da 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 ya da 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 הנה אל ישועתי אפתח ולא אפחד כי עוזי וזמרת יד אדוני ויהי לי לישועה ושבתם באים בששון ממעייני הישועה לאדוני הישועה על עמך ברכתך סלע Adonai Tzevaot imanu Miskav lanu Elohei Yaakov Selah Adonai Tzevaot Ashrei Adam boteach bach Adonai Hoshia HaMelech Yaneinu V'yom Koreinu ליהודים הייתה אורה ושמחה וששון ויקר כן תהיה לנו כוס ישועות אשא ובשם אדוני אקרא ידעי Savri Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei minei v'samim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei meorei ha'esh. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamavdil bein kodesh lechol bein or lechoshech bein Yisrael le'amim bein yom hashvi'i l'sheshet yemei hamaser Baruch atah Adonai hamavdil bein kodesh lechol Shavua Tov, everybody. I hope that it is a happy and healthy week for all. Thank you for being here. It's wonderful to see you all. And I wish you a Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov and Yasher Koach.
Yeah.
Thank
Let's
you.
run.